Good morning. In this video, I'll discuss military competence. In my earlier video, I spoke of political determination. And then I said that political determination and military competence are the most important of the 8 lessons that I will discuss in 8 videos based on the ongoing Ukraine war. And the reason these two are most important is because they constitute what is called a nation's deterrence, and these are universal lessons. They are applicable as much to the Ukraine war as to a war between India and Pakistan or a war between India and China. Given the importance of military competence, that means we need a military leadership. Any country should have a military leadership which is competent. Competence means it knows the basics of war and it has kept itself abreast with the advances in warfare. Now, with this as a backdrop, let us listen in to India's top military commander, Chief of Defence Staff, General Anil Chauhan, speaking at Raisiana Dialogue, addressing an international gathering.
You can look at any conflict with a number of perspectives and viewpoints, So you can have a perspective from a political point of view, probably from an economic point of view or a diplomatic point of view. But as an army officer and as a CDS, I see this war from the point of view of military practitioner actually. So we are looking at, what kind of lessons from this particular war are applicable in the Indian context. Obviously, our situations are entirely different. So we look at that. While we even look at that, we also like to see, we also understand that, there are no universally acceptable kind of lessons from this particular war. So, and in this particular war, you find a lot of, it's a different kind of a war. Earlier, we all assumed that future wars are going to be short, swift, and fast, but this is a very longish kind of a war. If you look at what's happening right now, is we have entered into a stage where the front lines are hardly moving. And today and yesterday's Bakhmut, if you see, even a 3-kilometer advance is being claimed by success by the Russians, by the same army which prided itself into a deep battle kind of a concept, or what the Americans called as air-land battle some time back, in which synchronization and simultaneity was of essence actually, and you could, non-linearity was there. You could attack targets much in depth, right from the front, middle and rear areas. But now we got stuck into a kind of warfare which is reminiscence of what you could say was First World War, trench kind of warfare. That's what.
Now, I must confess that after listening to Anil Chauhan, I was reminded of the Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu's saying. His famous quote is that if you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. I found it hugely embarrassing to listen to our top military commander, whose basics of war were defective. I have just pulled out 2 of the things that he said at that congregation. According to Anil Chauhan, he said that it was expected that future wars will be short, swift and fast, but this one is a longish war. He was referring to the Ukraine war. In other words, there is a basic doubt about complexion of war, which basically means the basics of war, that which war will be short and which will be long. The basics are not correct. I'll come to this. Second, he said that in this war, the front lines are hardly moving. And the Russians that pride themselves of the deep battle concept, which the Americans called air-land battle sometimes back, which is about non-linearity. That means you can attack targets in the depth, in the middle, in the front. The same Russians today are declaring a 3-kilometer move on the front line as a victory. In other words, he was equating, or in his thinking, the deep battle concept of the Soviets of the 80s is just about same as the American concept of air-land battle, which of course it is not. It is as different as chalk and cheese. And why it is important for him and our military leaders to know is because the whole concept of operational art is there in the deep battle concept which was enunciated by the Soviet General Staff in the 80s. The concept of operational art is missing in the air-land battles. The Americans never believed in that. But I will explain this in a little while. What is operational art? But the disappointing or the most important point is that India still follows the air-land battle concept of the Americans. Indian military follows that. That means we still follow a 1986 war concept, and the reason for that is simple. All our generals have risen in rank doing counter-terror operations for the last 3 decades. And hence, nobody has thought of really upgrading itself or thinking of new war concepts. And the PLA, which today is identified as a primary threat, they were focused on the Soviets and they picked up the operational art from the Soviets. And of course, they improved it. I will explain that in a while. But this is a very important thing that needs to be kept in mind. Now let's go to the basics of war. Why do nations go to war? Because there are certain core concerns or key objectives which they are unable to accomplish by peaceful means, by talks, by negotiation, so they go to war. They resort to use of force. Now, the complexion of war will be different if there are two major powers fighting, or there are two medium powers fighting, or there is a major and a medium power fighting. When I say major and medium, I am referring only to their military power, nothing else. Take for example, two major powers. Let's say China and America, or America or Russia. The problem is that if they get into a direct war, then both have a major issue, because neither side, given the parity of their military power, neither side will be able to exercise adequate war control to accomplish the war objectives for which the war was initiated in the first place. Now, if they are unable to accomplish the war objectives, they will also not have escalation control. That means things can go out of hand. They can go to the nuclear realm. And this is the key reasons why major powers don't fight directly, they fight a proxy war. Precisely what is happening in Ukraine. There a proxy war is being fought by US-led NATO against the Russians on the Ukrainian soil. Similarly, when there are two medium powers fighting, and mind you, these powers, this war which is going on, the proxy war in Ukraine, will be a protracted war because it's a proxy war. Now, if you take two medium powers like India and Pakistan, now plenty will tell me in my own country that, look, what are you saying? In conventional terms, capabilities, India is far superior to Pakistan military. That is not correct. And the reason is that since 1949, when the ceasefire line was first created, the Indian military has not been able to obliterate the military line. It still stands there with a bit of give and take of territory after the 71 war. Its name was changed from ceasefire to the line of control, nothing else. So mind you, at the operational level of war, the Pakistan military has maintained in all the wars a parity with the Indian army, Indian military. So they both are medium powers. Now when medium powers go to war, they also face a similar problem as the major powers. They will never have assured war control to achieve their objectives, full objectives that they have set out for themselves. And they will have very little escalation control. That means things can go spin out of hand and go in the nuclear realm. But the two good saving graces in their cases, two things are: one, they will have adequate international pressure coming on them the moment the war has started to finish the war earliest. So this will be one thing. So that war will be short. Number two, medium powers usually do not have a capability, an adequate capability, which means ammunition, spare parts, operational logistics for a sustained operations, because they usually don't have a vibrant military industrial complex, which in any case means that the war cannot be extended, it will be a short war. And this is one of the reasons that Pakistan finally decided, one of the reasons, there are other reasons why Pakistan decided that looks, the war, getting in a conventional war with India is not getting us anything. We are getting much more by their strategy of proxy war. But this is a different story. Now, what happens if there is a war between a major power and a medium power? Now, major power, look at the 1991 Gulf War, which was fought between a major power US military and a medium power, the Iraqi forces. There was a 12-year technology gap between them. So the Americans did a 44 days air campaign followed by only 100 days of land war. It was a short, decisive war, period. That means when a major power fights with a medium power, it will be a short, decisive war. It will be the same case if tomorrow there is a war between the PLA and the Indian military. Because there is a 30 years gap, technology and war concept gap between the two. So I will explain this war a little later, but rest be assured, this is for Anil Chauhan and the other military leaders. Rest be assured that you should be looking at only a short, swift and a decisive war coming from the Chinese side, from the PLA. Now at this stage, many people will ask me, how exactly am I qualified in the first place to comment on the thinking of India's Chief of Defence Staff with 40 years of service? Well, I'm not qualified, but let me tell you of American General, US General James Mattis, who at the Raisiana dialogue was sitting on the same dais, poker-faced, listening to Anil Chauhan. And this is what he has to say about military leaders. His quote is, if you haven't read hundreds of books, you are functionally illiterate and you will be incompetent, because your personal experience alone aren't broad enough to sustain you. In other words, it is immaterial if you have done counter-terror operations for 35, 40, 38 or 40 years. Because if you have not grasped the basics of warfare, and if more important, you have not kept yourself abreast with the advances in warfare, you are not a competent leader. I am not saying this. This is what General Mattis, who is a respectable leader, thinker, a military thinker, this is what he has to say. Now, having said that, let me now come to understanding what is this operational art, which is so important. What is it about? Now, in the 80s, the Soviets came to the conclusion, while both sides, the Americans and the Soviets, they both had strategic nuclear weapons and they both had tactical nuclear weapons. But the Soviet General Staff thought, they said that, look, nuclear weapons, whether tactical or strategic, they are not worth a usage because things will spin out of control. So we need to have a strategy which will give us a nuclear effect by non-nuclear means. And this is where operational art came in. So what the Soviet General Staff did was, as far as the front line was concerned, it was a non-issue for them. They simply expected their junior commanders to do simple maneuvers at the front line. Because the real war was to be fought in the theatre. How it was to be fought in the theatre is by the higher command, where the higher command would think as to how we can use three key things that they had to accomplish their campaign and to see that the defenses of the enemy, they get crumpled in very little time. They fall apart. And what are the three things? The three things were the vertical troop strikes. they had a capability of vertical troop strikes, which is the airborne division and the air assault divisions. For example, in the 80s, the Soviets had 7 airborne division as compared with America's 1, and they had 8 air assault divisions compared to America's 3. So the idea was that you should be able to do a massive vertical troop strike. Along with that, you should do integrated fire strikes. Fire strike means your missiles, your artillery, your rocket launchers and your air power. Now this integrated air strike is common to both, to the air-land battle concept as well as the deep concept of the Soviets. They both believed in that. But the Soviets had the third element also, which was to do the deep raids by what they called the operational maneuver groups. They were basically the groups which had the teeth only, no tail, what we call the logistics. They only had the teeth. And the teeth obviously was the armor, the mobile air defense, the self-propelled artillery, rocket launchers. This was the teeth. So the whole idea was that even before the front line is joined, where the young officers are there, they're doing simple maneuvers, the higher command had to come up with a flexible plan of how to disintegrate the entire defenses of the enemy by striking in the theater itself using these 3 elements. This is the operational art. This is the art of a generalship, what a general is required to do, and this requires boldness. Now, on the other hand, and this is something that the PLA picked up from the Soviets. Now, on the other hand, air-land battle was entirely different. What the Indians also follow and the Pakistanis also followed. In the air-land battle concept, the principal operations were to be done at the front line itself. And therefore, they gave importance to the mission command. They gave importance to tactical commanders, young officers being able to take independent decisions, tactical decisions, which is also called the directive style of command, because the importance was given there. And after that, when they set the operational level of war, the tactical level of war, operational level of war, because operational level of war is the level of war where you have a lot of battles which then become a campaign. So in the air-land battle concept, the operational level of war did not have operational art. It simply was an aggregation of assets. That means what you had at the tactical level, you increase that qualitatively, not quantitatively. You increase that quantitatively, not in terms of quality. You just have more numbers, more clusters of the same thing. So this was the thinking in the air-land battle concept, precisely what the Indian military even follows today. But of course, both sides had, as I said, the integrated fire strikes were there in both the concept. This was the concept of the 80s. Now, let's come to the PLA. What the PLA did was, all these wars which were fought until the PLA now came up with a new military strategy, all these wars were about attrition. Even this operational art was about how to destroy 50 to 60% of the enemy's assets at the earliest so that he is defeated in war. It is all attrition. But the PLA now has come with a concept of cognitive confrontation. And there are 2 reasons why they have come with a concept of cognitive confrontation leading to cognitive defeat. That means you basically put so much of pressure on the political leadership and the military leadership that they are completely perplexed, completely confounded, and even before, this is not a war of attrition where lives are to be lost. With minimal loss of life, they feel defeated. That means it's a cognitive war. And there were 2 reasons why they did that. Reason number 1 was that this is their thinking, this is the wisdom of the Chinese. Chinese favorite game, as most would know, is Go or Wei Qi. where they do not do a direct assault. In fact, the Chinese thinking is that war should be the last resort. Never enter a protracted war. Never get into a war if you're not assured of winning it. So this was one reason that this was their culture, that you have to do something asymmetrical. And the second is that a lot of technology had come in, and they knew that in terms of technology, they could not match the US military, so they had to come up with a asymmetrical thinking of how to deny communications in the combat zone to the enemy. So what this cognitive confrontation or the PLA war will be against India, a major power against a medium power. First of all, it will be a lightning campaign. Sorry, it will be swift. There will be no preparatory time given to the Indian military at all. That means all the forces of the Indian army, which are there south of Brahmaputra, planning to come up to the front lines, it will not happen. The entire war is being fought in the high altitude areas. We are looking at heights of 15,000 to 18,000 feet. That means the room for maneuver is very less. The targets are fixed. Most of the targets are static and well marked as far as the Chinese are concerned, because the Chinese have been sitting in that area for the last 2.5 years, and since August 2020 they've had a whole lot of sensors, and they have 5G right till the front line, which means the sensors are giving them data. The 5G is doing the IoT, and it's going back and they are getting the information. They are getting real-time intelligence. They know everything what's happening. Nothing is hidden in the combat zone from them. Now, their war will be whole of nation, because it's a cognitive war, which means that there's nothing called a front line. They will first of all attack the civilian side with their cyber capabilities. They've been doing cyber attacks for a long time. And they have very robust anti-satellite capabilities. They have a capability to cut the internet. So they have that capability to do sufficient chaos in the civilian life on the mainland, which will put a lot of pressure on the Indian political leadership. And in the combat zone, as I said, something that they have adopted. They have adopted from the Soviets, which is the concept of operational art, the deep strike. So they'll be looking at the whole combat zone. As far as they are concerned, the front line, which is where the Indian Army and the Air Force is concentrating, it will actually be meaningless. Their focus will be whole of combat zone, where they have a capability of vertical troop strike. Today the PLA Airborne Corps has something like 150,000 troops, airborne troops, and they have 4 air assault brigades. This is the colossal amount of manpower, airborne manpower that they have. And they have the capability, their missiles, their long range artillery, for look deep, hit deep, kill deep. And they can operate in 6 domains. Of these, 2 are the virtual domains and absolutely critical domains of electromagnetic spectrum and cyber. In other words, while the Indian military will be fighting on the front line, and it will be fighting also the geographical and the climatic factors because of the high altitude, the PLA will not have these constraints at all. Because what they will do is, and they have all the time in the world, 2.5 years they've been sitting here. All the targets are marked. So in the same thing what the Soviets used to do, what they will do is, let's say they have identified the combat zone as the entire state of Arunachal Pradesh. So what these guys will do is that they will bring in their vertical troops, they will do the deep strikes here, and they will create what is called mission sets. Now mission set, unlike a joint force, which is there in the air-land battle. Air-land battle is basically about, as I said, importance to the front line and creating a joint force. Precisely what the Indian military also wants to do, theaterization, as we talk about it, but it's a different subject, and I think it's the most nonsensical thing to do, theaterization. But this is a different subject. they do not believe in joint force, the PLA, because they will retain flexibility. What they will do is create mission sets, which are not theater specific, they are domain specific. They will see how best to kill the target, to take on the target in the combat zone through kinetic or non-kinetic means, and they will use that. And why I say flexibility is because the flexibility will come, they can either use the mission sets or the capabilities that they have, the domain capabilities, they can even use them as individual wars, independent wars like a space war, cyber war, invisible or spectrum war, which is about domination of the electromagnetic spectrum, missile war, drone war, light war, which is about laser weapons and about microwave weapons, and the information war. This is all so much of flexibility and operational surprise they can create. This is what they have. So therefore, what we are looking at is a war which will be fast, swift. In fact, the details are there in my book, The Last War, how it will play out. We have to face the reality. Now, this is one reality. The other reality is Pakistan. Why that is important today is because by what the government did on the 5th of August 2019, they have brought in the PLA also in the Ladakh theatre. PLA today is sitting in eastern Ladakh, and on the other side the Pakistan military is sitting, and they have been exercising since 2011. They've been doing Shaheen series of exercises, which is their air forces. Their special forces have been doing annual warrior exercises. So the war between medium powers, as I said, now here it will be a bit conclusive for the simple reason that they will have a certain edge now. It will not be a parity, they will have an edge because of the support that they will get from the PLA over the Indian military. And what support they will get is, they will get real-time intelligence, they will not have any shortage of ammunition, and they will have very powerful, we saw the electronic warfare in Balakot, and obviously for the last 2 years, the Pakistan Air Force has been working on a major project of cognitive electronic warfare. They'll get a lot of support also. Why I'm saying all these things will happen is because since 2 years, the news came, it was a big news, not highlighted in the Indian media at all, that Pakistani colonels, which is the middle ranking, the guys who actually do the planning, they have been embedded now in the PLA's Joint Staff Department, which is the highest operational command, headquarters, and as well as the Western Theatre Command. So what are they doing there? They're not twiddling their thumbs. They are basically working on the combined plans. So the point I'm making is, we should be looking at a situation as far as Pakistan will not initiate a war with India at all, rest be assured. The war will come this time from China, Pakistan will join in. That is a certainty. Pakistan will join in, and Pakistan will perhaps accomplish the objectives it has not been able to accomplish so far because of the edge that it will get owing to the support it will get from PLA. This is exactly what we are looking at. So I hope I have been able to answer all these doubts that Anil Chauhan has about short wars, long wars, and so we know the war will be swift and it will be short. Not only that, he made another remark which is it just occurred to me. He says that, in the long wars and short wars, the weapons used are different. In short war, we need more precision weapons. In the long war, we can do with some dumb bombs. I don't know what he's talking about. For God's sake, weapons have nothing to do, ammunition has nothing to do with a war being long or short. It is not specific to the complexion of war. It is how you use it. So the point I am making is, we have to face the truth. And the truth is that the military today in India is not completely seized of the war that they should be preparing for, because the entire focus is on the front line. And on the front line, nothing much will happen, let me tell you, because instead of, there will not even be many PLA soldiers on the front line doing simple maneuvers as was envisaged by the Soviet general staff. Instead, they could have a combination of three things. They could have thermobaric weapons. These are those weapons which take out the oxygen from defenses where the Indian military army could be, forcing them to come out. Then they could use their microwave weapons, something that the news said. It was alleged that microwave weapons were used at the Kailash range in August 2020 when the Indian army had seized that, but of course the Indian army denied that. But certainly they have microwave weapons, and most important, they have demonstrated the use of mini drones or slaughter bots, which can be released in hundreds from the ground or from the air, and which have the facial recognition capability of artificial intelligence. That means it is not about one soldier to another soldier fighting ek goli or ek jawan. It is about one PLA drone against one jawan of the Indian army. Please think that nothing will happen on the front line as we think, and all this effort is on the front line. This is not the war we are preparing for. In the next video, I'll talk about the lessons learned on the long range fires. If you have liked this video, I will really appreciate. Please subscribe so that I can reach to a larger viewership. Thank you.